Welcome to the Grow Renaissance podcast. Let's nourish the world.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Grow Renaissance podcast. We're super excited to have you all here with us, and super excited to have Joe here with us as well from Grow United. He's the head of sustainability operations. So we're super excited to have you here, Joe. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Owen.
Yeah. So Joe is full of knowledge in the environmental carbon credit area, and so we're super excited to kind of learn from him how that system works, how blockchain integrates into it, and then how that gives the Grow token more utility and really benefits all of us in nourishing the world, people and animals. And so Joe, if you don't mind, just give us kind of a little background of yourself, introduce yourself. I'll let you have the floor. So
sounds good. So yeah, my name is Joe Kochanski. As you mentioned, head of sustainability operations at Grow United. Just came on with the company a little over 2 months ago, and so I'm relatively fresh, but I have been working in sustainability for the last 15 years and essentially longer, but started my sort of sustainability career at a company called SCS Global Services, which is a third-party kind of niche certification body focusing entirely on social and environmental certification programs, including carbon offset verification projects and the like. Also had deep roots in agriculture at that company as well. In the 80s, their kind of claim to fame was a pesticide residue-free certification, kind of before organic became a thing. And then eventually they were doing organic certification programs and responsible sourcing. So looking at sort of, child labor issues on different supply chains, especially for companies like Starbucks and Ferrero Rocher, different entities that would be operating in the sort of global south. And so, really cool programs over there. I really focused entirely on forestry and some aquaculture, specifically kind of salmon certification programs, the ASC it's called, as well as wild capture fisheries, and actually eventually palm oil too. I was looking at the RSPO program for responsibly sourced palm oil supply chains. So that was kind of the root of my sort of background initially professionally. And in that capacity, I traveled sort of all around the world doing these third-party audits, lived in Australia for a while, helped get an office opened up over there. And then kind of towards the end of my career at SCS, I started seeing that the carbon market side of things was just growing and growing and growing, becoming a bigger part of the pie of our business, but also growing the pie as well quite a bit. And that might have been sort of in the kind of recent history of the voluntary carbon market, almost a peak at that point where everybody was just wanting carbon credits and these certifications, trying to fight climate change. So I started getting a lot of calls about different opportunities to go work in carbon markets full time. Ended up working my way into a company called Puro Earth, which their claim to fame was the sort of inventor of the carbon removal credit. So up until that point, all of the carbon credits that you would see were either reduced emissions or avoided emissions. And this kind of was a new category that has since become extremely popular for a variety of reasons, but it's actually the crediting of CO2 being taken out of the atmosphere.
Okay. Interesting. And then, so from there, what got you started into all this sustainability stuff, like back back in the day, I guess you would say, what really interested you in it?
So yeah, going back even a little bit further, and this is really where the story begins for me on my personal journey, if you will. But my dad was a park ranger, park manager. My mom was like a social studies teacher, so I was kind of trying to do this ultimately blending of my roots, of kind of the social aspect and the environmental aspect. So as a kid, I grew up in a pretty small town in central Wisconsin, so really kind of surrounded by ag and forestry.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, really just heavily impacted by all of that. But I did spend a lot of time out in the woods and really fascinated by nature, wanting to make sure that we could protect these resources and, you know, have a place for future generations to also enjoy those um, natural wonders of the world.
Yeah. No, and I think that goes right in line with, I mean, a royal family farming. That's kind of so it was my great grandpa that started the farms out here. He was one of the first ones to move back when it was all just sagebrush and rocks. He moved out here and started clearing the land. And I think that goes along pretty well with what we try to do out here, is like sustaining the earth for future generations so that, my grandkids and my great grandkids can still farm here and and um, still be good soil, like we don't just kill it off. And then in 10 years, it's like, well, we got to move somewhere else, something like that. So it really is like when you're out there in it, like you're like, man, we got to preserve this. It really is like a beautiful thing, I think.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Back in college, I was kind of seeing some case studies around Monsanto and sort of, killing off everything, but having a resilient crop that wasn't impacted by these chemicals, and
Mhm.
sort of selling that dream of, hey, we're going to make you lots of money and everything's going to be great.
Yeah.
Um, but obviously, nobody mentioned anything about the sort of polluting the waterways and really having a terrible impact on the
Yeah.
ecosystem in the soil and such.
Mhm. Yeah, and then when you kill everything except for that crop, like then the soil's just dead, and then you want like a living soil that has a lot of microbiology going on under there, and so yeah, it's a crazy crazy thing that they convinced everybody that was good. And I mean, we have a lot of food, so I mean we solved one issue that way, I guess, but now we got to solve the issue of having healthy food. So
Yeah,
um but
absolutely.
so,
Well,
yeah.
I will say too, just, I've been a member of different CSAs for the last several years, and always kind of going to farmers markets before that. And I swear, you taste an egg that was sort of actually coming from a farm. You knew where the source was, and those chickens are out just, eating bugs and whatever else they can find, rummaging around. And compare that to sort of the mass produced egg or other product, and it's just a completely different experience.
Yeah.
So we also do a lot of cooking at our house and kind of consider ourselves amateur chefs, but even some of the chefs who are actual instructors that we've talked to and kind of had some training courses on, they're just like, good food starts with good quality produce. It's got to start there. If you don't
Yeah.
have that, you can't have
Yeah.
a nice meal.
No, it's so true. I kind of going along with that. I in our backyard we planted just some carrots last year, and they came out just they were like huge, like that big around, like but they're only like that long, and then they were like ugly looking. But you chopped them up, and it like they had like a really strong flavor. And then you eat carrots from the store, and it's like eating water. Like there's nothing to it, like
Yeah,
it is so interesting. Just yeah, but so that's why you gotta know where your food's coming from, grow it the right way, um, and it just tastes better. Sometimes you dig up a carrot out here and you even get a little dirt with it. It just adds to it, I guess. I don't know, but um,
totally.
yeah. So going back to kind of sustainability and the carbon credit market, all of that kind of thing. Walk us through just really quickly how carbon credits are like created. What's the process like?
Yeah, for sure. So it does depend on the project type. I guess I'll kind of start with carbon removal because that is what I was working on the most. So there's different types of carbon removal. Probably most relevant to this audience is the soil carbon removal. So similar to planting a tree, where you're going to have that plant capturing CO2 from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. It's the same way with sort of regenerative ag and getting more soil into the ground. All of those kind of plants are going to be capturing up more CO2, and you want to just get as much carbon locked into that soil as you can. Um, and there's a range of benefits by doing that process. Soil quality, just in general, that micro, you know, um, just the ecosystem within the soil itself is, of course, super helpful. It's a great um, mechanism to fight climate change as well. Kind of, I heard from a rancher this past week that there isn't really a rain issue for the most part. It's just a soil issue that in
Because all
past.
the water just runs off of the bad soil.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I'll have to look more into that. Maybe talk to Neil about it because I know he's our go-to scientist and soil expert
Yeah.
and whatnot.
Yeah.
But but yeah, so that's one way. You got afforestation projects, another nature-based kind of pathway where you're actually planting trees to capture more CO2. Reforestation is where you've cut down a forest at some point in the past and are now kind of replanting it and what have you. And then you have more kind of engineered solutions or hybrid nature-based options like biochar, direct air capture. That's like a straight mechanical way of taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. Um, and the way we were doing things at Puro is requiring a full life cycle assessment, a cradle to grave LCA to be done. So tracking the all of the different emissions that might be needed to actually take CO2 out, and then you end up with a net negative number. So, say for every ton of biochar produced, you've got to be pulling in material from somewhere, some biomass. So, the further afield that you have to source that from, the more trucks that are using fossil fuels that you have to use. So there's a discount there. So the ideal situation, honestly, is if you have a place where there's agricultural processing, there's ag waste, you have a pile of material there, if you can process that and then put it out into farm fields really close by, then you can really kind of maximize the benefit. So that's all kind of in the sort of nature-based side of things, and or nature. Well, that's the carbon removal side of things. I'll just touch on avoided emissions, for example, is where you have a threat of deforestation, say in the Amazon. We're working on projects like that right now as well. And you've got illegal mining, you've got agricultural pressure happening where somebody wants to put in soybean fields or, beef or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just essentially mowing down the rainforest, and there's a big threat of that. That's a huge part of this. So you kind of calculate the risk of what the deforestation threat is, and you do intervention measures, and you're basically keeping that carbon where it is supposed to be. Yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of other things like industrial types of carbon credits where there's a baseline. This company might be allowed to emit a certain amount of CO2. And so if they put, say, some technology on their smokestack and start reducing it, they're not required to do that. So they can just, it's kind of free to pollute, unfortunately, in most cases. So, but it does cost money to put those intervention measures into place.
Yeah.
And you're really just calculating the reduction of emissions and selling that delta.
I see. So if you have a project that's pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, let's stick with that one, then you would contact an agency like, was it Pura or Trifera or something like that, and then they would collect all the data from it, run their tests, and then based off of that, you would get like you would get a certain number of carbon credits. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. There's kind of the old way of doing things, the current carbon market, and there's sort of new age. And that's kind of where we're fitting in today here at Grow and with, collaborations like Trifera. It's sort of a end-to-end digital solution. So kind of hopefully streamlining a lot of processes um, in this whole thing. Because, yeah, there's a lot of different entities involved in the carbon market that are all kind of serving a different purpose. But the end goal is to have really robust data, really credible analysis done, and then even at the point of minting of carbon NFTs in our case,
Mm-hmm.
being able to kind of present all of that information. So anybody that wants to kind of do their own check against that project and evaluate the data, evaluate the calculations, they can do that pretty easily because it's all been made available to them in a super transparent way.
Interesting. Now that's because so before kind of blockchain that and NFTs where everybody can kind of look into the data, what was that process like? Like if you were gonna sell carbon credits to somebody and you're like, I have 500 carbon credits, would you just hand them over all the paperwork and they'd have to look through it, or what was that process like before? And then we'll get into like the NFT side of things and how it changes it. But
Yeah. Well, it's, I think the biggest kind of concern about sort of the way things have been going is
mm-hmm.
that there's a lot of, well, it's very slow. First of all, you have these kind of the primary registry is taking a lot of time. They're pretty much all NGOs, and it's not that they don't want to move faster. I don't really know where the bottlenecks are, but there's just a lot of processes involved in creating a methodology, getting it approved, and then actually going through a verification process. It takes multiple years, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, well, our thesis here is that there's not really time for these significant delays in that whole process. So
Yeah.
that's one thing that absolutely needs to be tackled is just how long things take and how long it takes to get money back into the people that are actually doing the carbon projects directly.
Uh-huh.
So if you're talking about like let's say maybe a relatively poor farmer somewhere in South America, um, how long do they have before they're going to actually reap any benefits from the work that they've been doing? You know, if that timeline is too long, then they're going to be they might need to feed their family, and you know it.
Yeah, they can't wait 4 years to get paid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Whereas like a miner or somebody that wants to harvest that wood is going to say, hey, here's some cash today. Let me take these trees down. And so
yeah.
that's a very straightforward proposition in a sense. And that's sort of, one of the issues, I guess.
Okay. No, that's interesting, and I know from experience, like with Royal Family Farming and our when we put in like the worm farm and everything like that, getting the credits from that was it took years to do all of that and finally get them. And now using the Grow blockchain and Trifera, it's a lot smoother process and just very it seems to be a lot faster. There's some credits that should be coming out fairly soon. I'm not gonna give a lot of details on those yet, but and that'll be exciting. And it seems like that took I don't 6 months instead of the multiple years from so much faster, and then you can get a lot more done and really make a bigger difference than everyone sitting around waiting, kind of twiddling their thumbs for the reports to come back or whatever they are. So
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The climate can't wait. The action is needed now. And, the key thing is we need to be fast, but we need to make sure that the quality is equal to or better
Yeah.
than what was out there before. And I do think that we will have a better product at the end of the day, simply with the transparency side of things and sort of the real time monitoring as well. That's an innovation that hasn't been factored into most other sort of carbon market processes. So it does add some additional, actually, credibility to the whole system.
Real time monitoring. What do you mean by that? Can you like expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, well, with Trifera, working with the satellite monitoring, they can sort of order the, they do have to pay for this, so that it's not free, but they have access to these satellites that are constantly monitoring what's going on the ground, including, METHSAT, which is the methane satellite detection. So at least at a high level, you can sort of get a good sense of what's going on the ground. And
I
I
see.
think we're still trying to figure out exactly what is the right number, as far as checking what's the cadence required,
Mhm.
and what's the level of detail required, and so on. I think they've even used drones and such at different times depending on the situation.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, they've had drones out on our farms and been doing stuff. So it is super interesting all the technology that's coming out with it and really making a big difference. But that is the questions that I've heard from it is like, yeah, blockchain is great, all of this stuff is great, but how do you make sure that the data getting into the blockchain is correct to start? Because if that's from to me that's where our biggest, I don't want to call it an issue, but like hurdle, I guess, would just be like making sure that data that gets plugged into the blockchain is correct, because then you have the same issues. If not, you have the same issues as before where it's like people are skewing data or whatever. Is that
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, totally. Garbage in, garbage out. So you're
Yeah.
spot on that it it needs to be the correct information going in, and once it's there, you have this immutable nature of it. So
Hmm.
you can't really fudge things, especially after the fact. It's going to be right out there for everyone to see. But
Yeah.
traditional registries, at least kind of in my experience, is that technically you can change the data if you needed to. I didn't see that happen personally,
Yeah.
but I knew it was possible. And I do think that's one thing that a lot of people probably don't know. But hey, it's a database. So somebody has access that if they really wanted to, maybe it could get hacked. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the other thing that I'll just point out too is this, the importance of being able to put all of the data forward. And so there are ratings agencies out there. There are corporate buyers that are doing a lot of due diligence on projects. And in some cases, it's difficult or impossible to reproduce the results. So, just like an academic research paper, you want to be able to have other scientists go out and sort of run their own experiments and see if they get the same result.
Hmm.
In this case, they need more than just to do the proper due diligence. They need more than just a summary of findings, a summary of calculations. They need the underlying data, and that is a problem that we are absolutely solving here with the carbon NFTs.
Oh, because then we have all that data still in those specific NFTs that we can show them. Is that how that would work?
Exactly. So it's all publicly available. You can go look for yourself at the underlying data of the NFT itself and reproduce the results and do the fact checking. Whoever has an interest can do that.
I see. Because before, was it all that data would have been private, so you wouldn't know who to go check with? Is that what the issue was before?
Not all of it. Some of it is commercially confidential, so I guess that is one thing that people need to be sort of aware of. But it's more so that it just was, um, you'd only get really a summary. So
No.
an auditor is out there doing the check. And so then you're relying on what they're saying is true. But if you actually want to recalculate things, you don't have access to enough information to be able to do that.
Oh, I see. Yeah. That's one of the great things about blockchain with food and all the carbon credit stuff, sustainability is like you don't have to take anybody's word for like where the food is grown or whether it's like we'll give you all the data and then you can make your own decisions off of that. That's the great thing about it. As long as you know what you're looking for, you know,
Yeah,
uh, just educate yourself a little bit and you'll be good to go. So, but
totally.
um, so let's talk a little bit about like the grow blockchain specifically and how all of this ties into the token utility and how people can use that token to support sustainability projects and even buy carbon credits themselves, or I mean how would all that work?
Yeah, for sure. So, you have the Grow blockchain itself, which is a decentralized autonomous organization, basically, completely decentralized. Node owners are the people that are actually the owners, the shareholders of the blockchain itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sort of a member, just like anybody else would be. I kind of can vote and sort of have an input, but it's not controlled by anyone specifically. It's
Yeah.
decentralized. So Grow United is the custodian of the blockchain. And so we are sort of working on adding value for node owners, anybody that's involved with tokens and such. But I really like that aspect of it. Um, so yeah, at Grow United, I should say, we are kind of really focused on making sure that there is utility in these tokens. So the people that are, the backbone of this whole system, people that, are supporting it with essentially mining of tokens, kind of creating having the technology to sort of keep it decentralized and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So I guess how are we actually creating value? You have, and I know you're familiar with a lot of this stuff because Royal
Yeah.
is sort of the exemplary case study, quintessential believer in what we're doing, which is amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
But you have Nourish Marketplace, of course. That's just you can only buy products on that marketplace using Grow tokens. So that's like a pretty obvious value right there.
Yeah.
You've got Farm Tracer, which I guess is a little bit more disconnected from the actual token utility, but it does show what you can do with this blockchain technology. And then finally, the stuff I'm working on specifically, what I came on to do is sort of build out this registry side of things, the any sort of carbon NFTs with the intention of those credits only being available for purchase using Grow tokens.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that is it's a great use case, and I think it's not going to take very long for to add tons of value to this whole system with real world, you know,
Yeah.
carbon credits essentially.
Yeah. So the idea with that would be you create someone does a project, they get 50,000 carbon credits, they post them on the registry, somebody wants to buy them from them to offset something they're doing, they got to get grow tokens to buy those. That's the simple version of it, correct?
That is the intention. It's
Yeah.
not, and just for transparency, it's not that way today. You can actually buy NFTs with cash, but in the sort of midterm, I do think it's going to go more to a system where, well, even today, it's definitely encouraged that you would use a Grow NFT or a Grow token to make these purchases.
Yeah. No, and that I mean that kind of goes back to the people doing the projects need cash now or soon, and so that would it makes sense that we would be accepting cash for them now, and then in the future be moving towards like an only grow once there's some more like liquidity in the token and all that kind of thing. So that may to me at least that makes perfect sense that that's how it would be now. But
Well, you probably did see that sort of recent development, and I honestly can't probably speak very eloquently about this, but if you are holding, say, ETH, you can now, which is a pretty common current cryptocurrency, so a pretty well respected one, I guess. And if you're holding that, then you can do a pretty easy conversion so that you can, if you're on the Nourish marketplace or whatnot, you can just, get the exact amount that of grow tokens that you need to make
Yeah.
that purchase.
Yeah. No, that is a super helpful tool for sure. Um, and so we'll just kind of, I want to end with this question for you, but what are you most excited for in the coming months with everything you're doing?
Well, I'm super excited about some of the ranch land projects. And you're probably doing some stuff similar to this, but I'm learning a lot about, as an outsider, blockchain and crypto and what have you. So that's exciting in and of itself, is just getting exposed and learning more every day.
Yeah.
But I'm also learning a ton about this regenerative ag in general and sort of why it's important, and how to get there.
Hmm.
So there's a couple very large and interesting projects I've been talking to some folks about who are building them out. And I think there's some major potential. I think of, the vast plain states and whatnot, and, just opportunities there where ranch lands have been mismanaged, and, there's hundreds of thousands, if not actually millions of acres of potential sort of, you know, to implement better practices or best practices and really get that soil health going and locking up a bunch of carbon in the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. And then the ranchers can monetize that project essentially and with their carbon credits, which was something that most of them weren't aware of before, from my experience. So it's another thing to add to their balance sheet as well, which is would be very helpful for them, I'm sure. So that is super cool. And I know I said that was the last question, but I got one more because you kind of said you're super like kind of new into blockchain and whatnot. What got you into it? What made you excited, like interested in it? And,
Yeah, well, I'll be honest. One of the things was the Trump administration. So, with Donald Trump, President Trump coming in and having this focus on crypto, blockchain, and AI, and I just saw, well, this opportunity is right in the sweet spot of all of those things.
Mhm.
We've got the blockchain, we've got the crypto. Our partners are really deploying and building out AI with satellite monitoring. So, um, just the political environment was definitely one reason where I felt like this is a great opportunity to get into tech, if you will,
Yeah.
and also to just harness these new technologies and sort of get ahead of things because, as I mentioned, these other standards and registries are notorious for taking a long time to adapt and to build things out. So, sort of my prediction on that is we're going to be disruptive and come in with build this stuff out and then, get ahead of things, and others will eventually follow. But it's a great opportunity to sort of take advantage of where we're at with these new technologies.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And you were just at some big like carbon conference, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's called the North American Carbon World, and I'm pretty sure it's the biggest carbon specific conference in the world, aside from sort of COP, I
Mhm.
guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I was meeting with these ranchers and variety of stakeholders, verifiers, project developers, registries, sort of just floating sort of what we're doing to a bunch of different stakeholders, and pretty much everyone's really excited about what we're building over here.
Oh, awesome.
Think it can solve a lot of problems. I
Yeah.
was asked multiple times, well, what problem are you solving? And we talked a little bit about that earlier in the program, but
Yeah.
the transparency side of things, being able to reproduce the results, having this ledger, the immutable ledger of blockchain, it's just such a perfect use case for the tech. And I was working in chain of custody and supply chains traceability for 12 years. And I just can't believe that those other organizations weren't deploying the tech earlier either. They had just a lot of people talking and
Yeah.
not that many people actually harnessing the tech and just requiring it because it does create a better system.
Yeah. No, that's awesome that people were like excited about it and kind of saw the potential that it has. And so I feel like I like the carbon credit space for anyone watching. If it's hard to wrap your head around, that's okay, because I feel like it is. I feel like I've been kind of trying to figure it out for the past few years, and I'm getting it now. But I feel like there's so many questions. There's so many. It's a very not complicated, but kind of complex. I don't know if that's the same thing, but but it is very complex, and there's a lot moving, and we're solving a lot of the issues going on in there.
Well, maybe I'll end with this then, Owen, is just to kind of, because I thought this is a funny thing that everybody rightfully thinks it's like complicated, and it is kind of, it's reasonably complicated. But once you sit down and kind of have a conversation like this and sort of just talk through what it is and what it isn't, it actually is relatively simple to understand. So corporation, there's energy being used for this podcast right now. There's some sort of, maybe a kilogram of CO2. I don't know what the actual number is, but some sort of emission associated with this, because we need to power the computer, we need to use the internet, all these different things. And there's just no way of getting around emissions. People live, we build, we're growing. There's just emissions at every turn. And so what we're trying to get to is a net zero world, net zero emissions. And you can reduce emissions. You can do a lot of different ways to reduce emissions, mostly through renewable energy, replacing fossil fuel emissions. But like, that's the lion's share. But you can't stop emissions entirely. You can't remove them. You can never sort of get to zero just by reducing emissions. So at some point in time, you have to have these other projects like carbon removal, where you're compensating for the emissions that you have. So if a company has 100,000 tons of emissions, maybe they'll try and reduce them. Maybe they'll get, in a great scenario, maybe it'll get down to 50,000 tons over a period of some years. But at some point, that 50,000 or whatever, what the carbon market provides is a mechanism to buy 50,000 tons of carbon credits, and you have 50,000 tons of emissions, and that's where you get sort of this neutrality component.
Awesome. Yeah, and I love that, and I hope that this conversation that we had hopefully helped some people understand what we're doing and what's going on, and just why this is so important to nourishing people, animals, and the planet. And so I want to thank you, Joe, for coming on here and talking with me. It was a real pleasure, so thank you.
Absolutely, Owen. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Yep, take care.
You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Grow Renaissance podcast. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe this episode. Remember, it will take a community of us to do the best in the world and truly nourish not only ourselves, but the planet, the atmosphere, the soil, the plants, and the animals on it. So make sure you spread this message anywhere that you can.